Xi's last frontier, China's plan to transform its West. Again, this is an article from Financial Times. I noticed ever since Financial Times got taken over by Japanese ownership, they start to pump more and more anti-China articles. So anyway, so they're talking about Xi Jinping's plan for a new year-long investment push on its western regions. They're talking about Xinjiang and Tibet in particular. Will transform an area that covers close to 1/3 of China's landmass, an area that roughly 10 times the size of UK and comparable to much of the Western Europe.
Because there's always been this narrative how they're trying to isolate Xinjiang. And they're putting so much investment in there. They're connecting it to the rest of the world also, which is a natural reaction also for the U.S. trying to cut China off through different means. It makes sense to develop that region also.
These are some of the highlights, the article. So taken together, analysts say the plan for a new year-long investment push by Beijing is set to transform an area that covers close to 1/3 of China's landmass, blah, blah, blah. The policy is a challenge to the U.S.-led sanction regime imposed to punish China after it detained an estimated million Uyghurs and other, again, this is an allegation which is not true, in the mid to late 2010s. The UN top human rights official said the crackdown could amount to crime against humanity. The Chinese government has long defended its action in Xinjiang as targeted measure to combat terrorism and extremism. Officials also deny state campaign of re-education and forced labor. The policy is poised to immerse Xinjiang and Tibet not only deeper into China's economy and mainstream culture, but also into the global supply chain. It could also help the People's Liberation Army bolster China's security along its border with India, Russia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and parts of Central Asia. If China is successful in integrating the region and their people into China's mainstream economy and population, that could over time make it more difficult for Western government to use sanctions or boycotts as an effective response to repression. I mean, this is just what they're really saying. They don't care about repression or that. What they're really saying is it will make it harder for United States to sanction China. That's what they're really saying. And the guy who quote tweeted, he's saying, the media as an institution is deeply feminine. It henpecks, clutches pearl, but it doesn't commit to the normative position that Xinjiang is to be China's Afghanistan, pre-modern and ungovernable, all be separate. Or just how dare they counter our attempt to deny Uyghur employment. I mean, like, that's what the Western sanction is designed to do. It's designed to deny employment to the Uyghur people, and to make them unemployable. And this is but what the article is saying, that China's effort to integrate it is going to make these Western sanctions increasingly ineffective. So that's the real complaint. It's like the U.S. will lose a weapon to pressurize China.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that. I know we've mentioned this before in previous shows, but one of the most effective ways of reducing extremism that was creeping into Xinjiang before was to increase economic opportunities. According to World Bank studies, according to many studies, the biggest driver of extremism is a lack of opportunities. They brought opportunities to Xinjiang, and it reduced extremism, of course, with other measures as well. Now, when the U.S. removed ETIM from the official terrorist list, basically the Uyghur separatist group, you knew what they were setting up. You knew what they were lining up. And by looking for any factory that hires any Uyghur, and just an image of a Uyghur in a factory being enough to sanction them, has scared many companies away from hiring Uyghurs. It's just not worth the risk. But that's the whole idea. That's the whole goal, is to try to impoverish them. And there's other outlets that have talked about sanctions on different places in the world where they are designed to foment dissent amongst your population so that they rise up against their government. Rudy Giuliani even said it directly with Iran. When Iran was under brutal sanctions, he was actually celebrating the fact that there were people in Iran selling their organs for like $100. He says probably a fortune to them. He says the sanctions are working. They're doing what we want. Like he was literally celebrating that ordinary Iranians had to sell their organs to make ends meet. So you're absolutely right. That is the whole goal.
Scott Besson also boasted about that, and the specific deal they complain about in the article, in the FT article, is that in March, the Xinjiang government and state-controlled Xinjiang Production Construction Corp announced 92 cooperation agreement with 18 state-owned enterprises in Beijing, spanning sector from energy, critical mineral to computing infrastructure and equipment manufacturing. The deal highlight that along with tourism spending, a big chunk of economic growth is coming from investment by state-owned enterprises and companies from China's more affluent east, akin to a nation receiving foreign direct investment. Over recent months, Chinese state media reported robust medium-term growth figures for both Xinjiang and Tibet. Average annual growth rate in 2025 on a regional GDP basis were 5.5% for Xinjiang and 7% for Tibet, respectively, outperforming the rest of the Chinese economy. This is bad, according to FT. The Xinjiang and Tibet is growing economically. This is somehow bad because it kind of taken a weapon out of the arsenal of the U.S. sanction regime against China.
Absolutely. And that probably ties in really nicely with a comment that you liked online. Here we go.
The more intellectually limited, this original comment was actually in Spanish, but thanks to the auto translation on the X, the more intellectually limited a person is, the more idealized their view of the United States. I mean, how can you argue with that at this point in 2026?
In 2026, yeah. In 2026. Before, you could excuse it a little bit more. There were even more Chinese, 10 years ago that would romanticize, the West. And, part of it is just a natural human nature. The grass is always greener on the other side, or whatever the local Chinese phrases of that is, 那山比之山高, like that was, and the U.S. did a good job of creating an image that it was the land of the free, all this kind of stuff. But that has fallen now, and you have less people in China who are kind of looking at the U.S. in that same kind of romanticized way. But that comment is definitely true for this day and age. We have one from Kishore Mahbubani that you brought up too, which is a really good video, and makes a brilliant, simple, easy to understand point. And we will listen to the video directly to see what he's saying about that. Here we go.
So after China has gone through the best 30-year period ever under the Chinese Communist Party, the United States is telling the Chinese people, why don't you get rid of the Chinese Communist Party? And the Chinese people are scratching their head and say, excuse me,
Yeah, I mean, it's so simply true. Look at how far, and with corruption also, like the corruption level in China from when she started to now is a massive difference. I will say that in the earlier stages, when term limits were changed, there were some people in China who were concerned. They were like, this is not so good. Like there were, but you don't hear that as much now. Not because they've been brainwashed, not because, the state media told them to think this way, but because they're seeing the actual progress on the ground. And a lot of people, they ask me that question too. They say, aren't you worried that he'll continue on forever? And I was like, first of all, I don't think he's going to continue on forever. But to be honest, I'm more concerned about what happens with the next guy.
Yes.
The Chinese system is set up in a way where it has fairly good consistency in the vision and the way it moves. But what if the next guy is just, not as good, or, feeds into a more nationalistic approach? I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Kishore or, no, it might have been Eric Lee who was talking about if you had kind of, elections in China, or it was something along the lines of this, you would have to create, parties or traditional elections, because they do have types of elections here. But if they had Western liberal style democracy, you would have to create parties that would almost need to capitalize on the differences between people. And all you would need is one party to say, we are going to finally get revenge for what Japan did to us. And we're going to do, the Chinese people would be totally in on it. They'd be like, yes, yes. But luckily, you have level-headed government here who looks at not these kinds of, short-term revenge tying into short-term emotional needs, and actually makes decisions based on long-term goals and everything like that. But I don't know if you want to add more on what Kishore has said there.
I mean, how can you argue with that? how can you argue with that? That's exactly what's happening. That's why, like, the Western narrative from China increasingly no longer works in China, because people look at you like, you crazy? Are you crazy?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll blast through the last few items here. I've got to do some stuff for my RV. We're driving our RV through Xinjiang for 2 months, so I'm getting all the little repairs done. We've got a water pump, we got to fix it, everything like that. But let's go. Obviously, since our last show, we had a lot of posts come up on the anniversary of the events in Tiananmen Square. Here we go. Marco Rubio, on June 4th, the world marks 37 years since the Chinese Communist Party ordered its troops to attack thousands of peaceful demonstrators in and around Tiananmen Square. Those who sacrificed to uphold their unalienable rights of free expression and peaceful assembly will be vindicated someday. Like, this is what they still have to hang on to something from 37 years ago and paint it in a way that didn't actually happen. Like, without, saying that it was completely peaceful, completely ignoring the fact there's tons of evidence showing that police officers, military personnel, they were torched. Some of them were torched. They were killed by protesters. Even the photographer, as you pointed out last time, was beaten up, and he talked about that by the rioters.
He also witnessed the rioters, the mob lynch one of the PLA soldier. He talked about that in an interview.
Pulled him out of his vehicle.
Pulled him out of the vehicle, and he said that guy probably didn't make it.
Yeah. But I mean, what does that say? Where you have the U.S. actively cracking down on, pro-Palestinian protests, on freedom of speech on campuses, all of this stuff that they're pretending to care about, in a version of China from 37 years ago. Like, this is what they still have to hang on to, because they don't really have any other recent examples. And how many people has the U.S. killed since then? Well, first of all, the U.S. police kill every single year, 1,000 people every single year. American police kill. And then never mind talking about the millions of people that have died since even just 9/11 in either U.S.-led wars or U.S. proxy wars. And they're still hanging on to this. They have
to go back 37 years. They have to go back 37 years to fault China for some event. Yeah.
I mean, the unfortunate thing about the way that China approaches this is they don't really talk about it. There's information available online. If you search for it specifically, there's documents online, how many students were killed, how many police were killed, all of this stuff. You can find it on Chinese internet, but it's not something that they actively discuss. And because of go ahead.
I did my part. People can go to my YouTube channel and find a video where I just talked a few days ago about what happened from my perspective, because I was 13-year-old back then, living on Chongqing University campus when the protest happened. I give it my take from my perspective for people who are interested in that thing.
Yeah. No, that's. I mean, did you talk about what's her name, Chailing? How she was.
Yes. Yeah. I had the video. I found that video clip of her interview when she said she's too good to die with the rest of those students, but she said what we need is bloodshed. They don't know what's coming, but I have plans for them. My plan is to force the government to shed blood so they can wake up.
And then when she was asked if she was going to be there, she said, "Oh no, I won't be there for that." It's like, but because China itself doesn't, decides not to talk about it much. The West for a long time has dominated the narrative on that, to the point where you even had, what's her name, Vicky Xu, who went to work for Australian Strategic Policy Institute, a literal organization that's funded by the U.S. State Department and weapons manufacturers, of all places, after you had your so-called epiphany about China. And the evils of China, you decide to go to work for a military industrial complex funded think tank. Like that aside, she said one of her moments of awakening was that when she went overseas, it's the first time ever she saw the video of Tank Man. And she says, I can't believe this has been hidden to me for my entire life. But as a result of never hearing about what actually happened, she then decided to adopt wholesale the West's narrative on what happened during that event. So that's something that China kind of undermines themselves with it. I mean, it's hard to say what's right or wrong, but it's just something they decide not to talk about. But perhaps, do you want to add something before I bring up the next one?
No, I agree. I think that's one of the things I think China could do is just lighten up on the censorship a little bit. China should be more confident in how its own people talk about things. I mean, like a lot of people. Space so for that too now. The very common talking points I see on Twitter, actually, Daniel, is Chinese people say, "Oh, I climbed the ladder, I climbed the Great Firewall to come here. I thought I would be able to find some dirt." Then I realized, oh my God, what I see here actually makes me more patriotic than ever. After I have served the internet outside the Great Firewall, see all these people levying attack against China. That makes me a more patriotic citizen than my Chinese government education could ever make me.
Absolutely, yeah. And then we were talking about this is also the Chinese government works tirelessly to erase the memory of June 4th, 1989 from the internet. The CCP's censorship on Tiananmen is not just about the past, it's about controlling the present. China remains the world's worst environment for internet freedom. There's no evidence of them trying to erase this nationally and internationally. And one of the best examples of that is TikTok. Even before it was, bought out, the American operations was bought out. If you search Tiananmen Square on there was all kinds of, Western narrative perspectives on Tiananmen Square. There are, of course, people talking about the alternative, the actual, what actually happened, but largely it was dominated by more of an anti-China stance, which also shouldn't be happening if TikTok was indeed a Chinese government-controlled app, like they're saying. But yeah, no.
Well, the real reason they didn't like TikTok because it talks about Israeli crimes. A lot of young people are talking about Israeli crimes. That's why they didn't like TikTok.
Yeah. And then so
there it is.
Yeah,
there it is. The same Freedom House index of freedom that give China score 9 out of 100, give Israel 73 out of 100. That's this is said.
Yeah. What like what? You have to be an actual cattle to to think China is less free than the West Bank. Even when the West Bank they put lower, but still, come on. You had, so I'm going to rush through some of this. So we had, this was translated from Chinese last night. Our program once again discussed June 4th, and I feel that the overseas public opinion circle should have more such calm discussions. That is why the June 4th generation no longer possesses moral appeal. This absolutely cannot be explained by simply phrases like the CCP blocks information. It after a certain period of time, people are going to find out the real facts, even that are backed up by Western media at the time. And you get it's like, don't we have anything new to talk about? We're continually talking about what happened decades and decades ago while we're doing all this stuff. Eventually it's going to lose its oomph. But I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, exactly. For the Zoomers, this happened before they were even born. And for them, what they see is what's currently happening, which is U.S. and Israel are waging, illegal aggression against Iran, and they're they're committing ethnic cleansing against Palestinians, and Israel is launching an illegal war of aggression against southern Lebanon. And this is what people sees every day. And you're gonna, for them, like talking about something happened 37 years ago in China, it does not resonate. And this is why, like, I notice even on Twitter, the people who are talking about it nowadays are just mostly, U.S. government officials, Western pundits. Most of the youngins don't really care about that.
Right. Let me see here. Okay. This is another one of. Oh, this is. I think you brought this one up, right?
Yeah. So again, this is an old FT article. Well, not old, like a few weeks ago, reporting about again. They're kind of trying to bring back that Uyghur genocide narrative back into the mainstream. I think my personal opinion is there is part of their distraction campaign from what Israel is doing. Right, but again, they're hammering the same talking points again and again about how Uyghur is oppressed. But my advice to people: just travel to Xinjiang. I've been there. I've been there last year. I don't see oppression. I talk to people from all walks of life in Xinjiang. They speak their local language. Whether adults or children, they all speak. The fact that the claim that 90% of the kids were taken away from their parents, sending into some kind of brainwashing boarding school, like what they did to Native Americans in Canada and US, that is bullshit, man. I saw little kids go to school just like any other kids in the morning and then go back home in the evening. I saw that with my own eyes, and I interact them. I hear them speaking Uyghur. I ask them questions in Chinese. They don't seem oppressed to me.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this on a previous show. I have a friend there who showed me all around the bazaar, the Sunday bazaar in Kashgar, and became longtime friends with him and his family. I sent him a skateboard when I got back to Chongqing, and then I went and saw him a couple of weeks ago. Him and his family, him and his cousin and his uncle were there. And they had to translate for their uncle. They were translating Uyghur between him and us. It's a lot. I'm going my 9th time to Xinjiang. This time self-driving through Xinjiang from one end to another.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous. I mean, like, and the people are super friendly. Like, all I had to do was just learn a couple of Uyghur phrases. I just go around and says Yashimu says, and everybody just like their face just changed and they smile and they try to have a conversation with me. I mean, like, yeah, man. Yeah, it's a great place.
Yeah. I think, you know what, I'll mention too, I know I mentioned this on the show before, they paused the Xinjiang propaganda for a while because they, I think, when the U.S. was supporting what Israel was doing to Muslims in Gaza and the level of what was going on that you could actually see with your own eyes, it would seem really tacky to still try to pretend that you care about Muslims in China, that things are supposedly happening to that you need to rely on your imagination for. And is also, even if it were true, which it's not, but even if it were true, it's not being funded by the American taxpayer. So you saw a couple of instances where they were trying to revive it, but they did it a little bit too early, where people like, really? Are you serious right now? Because all the people who are talking about Xinjiang, for the most part, are people who support what Israel is doing to Muslims in Gaza. And so people were calling them out like crazy. Now that the Gaza issue, even though it's still ongoing, isn't in the forefront as much, you're going to see them try to creep this back in and try to revive it.